My name's Lisa, and this is Freedom Grows. There are actually more than 10 things I wish I would have known before starting a food garden in Florida, but I will just condense the list and give you 10 things that I wish I would have known. I think these are probably going to be most helpful to you if you are starting your gardening journey. It doesn't have to be in Florida, it could be in any subtropical climate similar to Florida. But I'm just going to jump right into this list. This is not in any particular order. I'm just going to list them out randomly. Now, the first, and I think the most important one, is actually the climate here. We are in a subtropical climate. We get a lot of humidity here and a lot of warm, intensely hot months. We have very mild winters. Some areas in Florida don't even experience any freezing. Where I am, I do experience some freezing. I'm in zone 9A, but generally the winters are very quick and very mild. Now, because we have warmer or hotter months throughout the year, we do have a longer growing period, which is great, but it can be challenging to grow some of those cooler weather crops. I have been wanting to grow rhubarb here since I started gardening, and I have not been able to. We just don't have as many cold months as rhubarb prefers, and the intense heat just doesn't allow it to grow properly, at least not in my experience. Another example is cilantro. I love cilantro, but we have a really short growing period for it. It gets too hot too fast, and any intense heat that cilantro experiences, it will just bolt on you. It'll go to flower, and the leaves at that point are not edible. However, the good thing about that is once it seeds, you can use those seeds as a spice because it becomes coriander. That's what the seeds are. And then, of course, you can save those seeds for future cilantro plants. And yes, we can grow those cool weather crops, but we have to do it a little bit later in the season. So we'd have to start them in, let's say, December, for instance, because our coldest months are end of January, February. And this year, the cooler weather crept into the month of March. Second one on my list are the subtropical droughts. We do get a lot of dry weather here. Although we are in Florida, it does rain heavily, especially during the summertime. The rain is just not consistent. In the springtime, we don't get a lot of rain. Now is when we're starting to see a lot of the rains consistently, several days a week. Like right now, we are in the end of May, but that just started happening, at least for me in my area. Summertime is when we get most of our rains, but in the fall, drought. Winter, drought. So we have to do a lot of hand watering or set up irrigation so that the plants get proper watering. Other states may have more reliable sources of natural water and rain, but in our case, it's a very droughty state, if droughty is even a word. Third one on my list are freezes. Yes, this is a very hot state, but we do also get freezes, at least where I am. I'm in zone 9A, and this past December, we experienced several nights of frost, but there were 3 nights of frost in a row that caused all of my papaya plants to die. I lost some pineapple plants, a few tomato plants, and that was with me preparing for these frosty nights. I covered them thinking that they would stay warm, and it didn't work out. Fourth one on my list is the soil. Now, I thought, yeah, sure, I'll start gardening in containers and then easily transplant them in the ground, not thinking or realizing that most of the soil out here is just sandy, nutrient depleted soil. So you have to amend that soil most of the time before you want to plant anything in ground. And that was in my case. So I was thinking that maybe I'd put carrots in the ground or onions, and I couldn't do that because I had to build up the soil first. Now, there are some crops that do very well with the nutrient poor, very sandy, very quick draining soil. And that's really great for the native crops and native plants that are used to growing out here. But otherwise, you'll have to definitely amend the soil or create raised beds and grow in raised beds or in containers in my case. Now, I did have certain things in ground, but I amended the soil. I had tomato plants, pepper plants, watermelon, squash, zucchinis, roselle, which does great out here. Of course, my bananas and papaya trees, my Barbados cherry tree. I had all of that in ground, but I had to amend the soil. So I had to add compost to it, made sure that I fertilized every month or so with some worm castings and top the area around it with more compost. I would also do the chop and drop method, where if I'm out harvesting or cleaning up some of the plants and I notice that I'm not going to use certain crops, or certain crops were half eaten by pests, I would just chop that off and drop it right next to the things that were growing in ground, or just slightly bury it right around those plants. And eventually that decomposes and it creates nutrients for those plants. So that worked out really well. But you definitely need to think about amending the soil before planting anything in ground that isn't native to Florida and already used to this type of soil. Fifth one would be bugs, pests, and diseases. Now, Florida has a unique set of bugs and diseases that can affect your crops, especially if you're growing organically and you're not spraying any pesticides on your crops. It can be pretty challenging to control. I don't know if it has to do with the humidity that we have out here or really what it is, but we have a lot of pest pressure. We also have the citrus greening issue, nematodes, whiteflies, whatever, you name it, we probably have it. So what I like to do to combat that is I will come out every couple of days, check the plants for any pests, and manually remove them. As gross as it sounds and as it actually is for me, just has to be done. I also allow the beneficial insects to take care of some of my pest problems. Like, for instance, I have a Barbados cherry tree that was pretty stressed out and it became infested with aphids, and I was going to spray all the little aphids down when I noticed that there were a couple of little ladybugs walking around the tree. So I didn't want to spray it down because I didn't want to hurt the ladybugs, but I also knew that the ladybugs would take care of my aphid problem. And sure enough, a few days later, I checked on the tree and there were no aphids. So those beneficial insects took care of the problem. Now, if I notice that there are pests that are rapidly reproducing, I will make a natural insecticidal spray where I take a spray bottle and add a little bit of dish soap. I make sure that it's a natural dish soap, nothing that has harsh chemicals or toxins. I also add a little bit of neem oil in there, and then I dilute all that with some water, shake it up, spray the leaves heavily, and that takes care of the little pest problem at hand. But it is definitely challenging to deal with all the pest pressure that we do have. But thankfully, there are nice options to manage that. Like I said, those beneficial insects, the insecticidal sprays that you can create yourself. You can also plant marigolds and other flowers that repel certain pests around your crops. So that's another good remedy to control the pest population, is planting flowers that repel certain pests. Number 6 on my list are squirrels. I don't know how the squirrels are in your state, if you're watching from a different state or country, but the squirrels out here are disrespectful. I had to think about building a little barrier around some of my container plants last year just to make sure that the squirrels wouldn't demolish anything that was growing. Now, I have had my Meyer lemon tree for 4 years now, and I have never gotten one lemon to fully form and ripen for me because of the squirrels. Now, I don't know what they think those small little lemons are, but they pull it off, take a bite, realize, ew, they don't like it, they spit it out, and then the same one comes back an hour later and pulls off another one as if he didn't learn his lesson the first time. So, or she, who knows? But they can be a big problem out here. Number 7 are onions. Now, I love onions. When I first started gardening, I purchased a whole bunch of onion seeds thinking, yeah, sure, everything's gonna just work out fine. No, there are short day onions and long day onions, and I didn't realize that the onions that I preferred were long day onions, which do a lot better in the northern states, not here in Florida, where we have shorter days. So a lot of the short day onions do really well out here. If you're trying to grow long day onions, they may not fully form or not form as large as you prefer. A solution to that would be to grow shallots. I have a video all about growing shallots. I will link that in the description so that you can see my process, but those were very successful. It grows similar to garlic, where they grow in little bunches, not in individual bulbs. And what I harvested was a good size for my small family. My son is in the military right now. He is deployed in Saudi Arabia, so he's not getting to enjoy what we harvest here. but my daughter does. And unfortunately, my husband doesn't really eat any fruits or vegetables, which is very strange, but it is what it is. So most of what I'm harvesting is for my daughter and I. And we have enough shallots to last us a couple of months from growing in 3 separate containers that were about 5 gallons each. Number 8 on the list are tomatoes. Now, smaller tomatoes do so much better than the larger tomatoes. The reason for that is because the larger tomatoes take a lot longer to ripen than the smaller ones. And while they're ripening, we are competing with so many different pests and diseases. Take it from me, the other day I had to come out and do a lot of tomato cleanup. I had so many tomatoes that were damaged by the tomato hornworm and another pest that I forgot right now what it's called. But if you're not dealing with pests like these, you're probably having to deal with blossom end rot and other diseases that may take over the tomato plant. So you'll be a lot more successful growing those smaller tomato varieties. I have red cherry tomatoes, sun gold tomatoes, yellow pear tomatoes, and Everglades tomatoes that are doing wonderful. Have not had any pest pressure like my larger tomatoes have had. Number 9 on my list is planting flowers or herbs that repel insects at the same time as planting certain crops. So by now I know that aphids love just about anything, but they seem to be attracted to lettuces, my brassicas like broccoli, cabbage, my Barbados cherry tree. But they don't like the smell of certain flowers like marigolds or petunias, geranium. Also herbs like lemon balm, basil, chives, oregano, rosemary. All of those repel those little insects that can damage your crops. So try starting some, or at least buying some plant starts, and put them in between your food crops that are more susceptible to these little pests so you can get ahead of the issue. The good thing about having more flowers in the garden is that it also attracts those beneficial insects and pollinators like your bees, butterflies, even wasps, ladybugs, and they will also help take care of those pest issues. Last on my list is to not fight with nature or the conditions out here, and to just work with it and plant things that are either native to Florida or that do really well in these subtropical climates. Like, for instance, Everglades tomatoes. I initially thought that they were native to Florida because of how well they do out here, but they're not. However, they work really well. So I've got a few Everglades tomato plants growing, and I've not had any problems whatsoever. Not with the weather, not with the extreme heat, any pests, diseases. They are doing wonderful. Native peppers. If you like hot peppers, there's one called Suave Numex that's native to Florida, and it does really well out here. There are also native mulberries, native persimmons, wild coffee, and roselle does really good out here. Although it's not native to Florida, it does great. It withstands the intense heat of the summer, and you can also eat the leaves. With my roselle bushes, I made roselle jam, roselle teas, roselle juice, and it is absolutely delicious. Now, overall, because of Florida's unique climate, soil, pests and diseases, and of course water availability, it can be challenging to grow out here, but we can make it work, and we can plant and harvest every month out of the year, which is great because we do have a longer growing season. It's just all about learning what works out here and incorporating those practices or growing those crops in your garden. So I hope this list is helpful to you. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel so that you don't miss any future content. I would also truly appreciate the support. Thank you for being here.